On our tour of Great American Gardens, we explore the harsh beauty of the desert. Sharp needles and plants that play dead strut their stuff at this garden in Phoenix, Arizona. A parade of ancient trees is showcased at the Arnold Arboretum in Massachusetts. And a community comes together to turn a littered corner of New York City into a place where flowers bloom. It's all ahead on Great American Gardens. Hello, welcome to Great American Gardens. I'm Tricia Springer. On one hand, you have the dry, stifling heat of the desert. On the other, you have the dewy humidity of the tropics. Which climate would you think would be filled with lush plants and colorful blossoms? If you said both, well, perhaps you've been to Phoenix, Arizona. Heat rises from the desert floor in Phoenix, Arizona. Here, temperatures can soar over 100 degrees. But not even the blazing sun can keep avid garden lovers away from the Desert Botanical Garden.
I am very proud of this garden, mostly because when people walk in, they say, "Wow, what a beautiful garden."
In this garden, beauty comes in many forms. A desert plant that disguises itself to look like other plants. A fallen tree that was made into a growing work of art. And a cactus with a cuddly name, but you don't want to touch it. "145 acres make up this desert garden that lies below the hills of Papago Park. Over 20,000 different kinds of plants live under the hot desert sun, from soaring saguaro cactus to delicate-looking wildflowers.
People should come to see this garden because it has the biggest collection of desert plants in the world. So here we have everything that you can possibly see in a desert.
Preserving the desert environment is what prompted the founding of the Desert Botanical Garden in 1937. A group of avid gardeners headed by benefactor Gertrude Devine Webster and plant lover Gustav Stark convinced the city of Phoenix to create a botanical garden.
And by doing that, they were able to obtain the lease of the land and create a garden that today is one of the best gardens in the United States.
The diversity of desert plant life ranges from Chihuahuan desert natives to Brazilian transplants. Many of them can be found on the desert's main trail, the Desert Discovery Trail. 1/3 of a mile long, this path reveals over 25 acres of the garden. One resident along the trail is the Arizona Queen of the Night, a plant native of the Sonoran Desert. Though not much to look at, the beauty of this plant is its mastery of disguise. It can camouflage itself to look like nearby plants, like this cactus. And sometimes it goes a step further.
It looks like a dead stick, so nobody thinks that that's truly a plant.
But this plant may be a little too good at its job. Its dried-up appearance makes it easy to overlook or toss aside. Development in desert areas is destroying the plant's native habitats, making the Arizona Queen of the Night a threatened species. Further along the trail is another plant that is a master at deception. The teddy bear cholla is a cactus with a cuddly name and a mean bite.
Don't get too close to that plant. Stay away from it. It has a cute name, but it's probably the meanest plant that you can see in the desert.
One brush with the teddy bear cholla can leave hundreds of painful spines embedded in the skin. Many desert plants have shallow and widespread root systems to soak up rain. Others, like the Palo Alto tree, also have tiny leaves that require less water. The trees will even shed these leaves when water is scarce. To make up for smaller or fewer leaves, the Palo Alto tree also has a green trunk full of chlorophyll that aids in the production of food for the plant.
What is intriguing about desert plants is the way that they survive in the desert. Living in an environment with 7 inches of rainfall is something that you have to keep in mind. It's unique.
But the desert isn't always dry. Sometimes, when it rains, it pours. It was due to a rainstorm that this skunk tree has more to offer than just a pungent smell.
During the monsoon season, this tree broke. The big limb went down, and most people told me that I needed to remove the arm. But instead of doing that, I decided to prune it for art. Now I think that it gives so much to our garden that people stop and say, look at that tree. It looks so different from any other tree. Great piece.
The Desert Botanical Garden is full of great pieces in the plant world. Plants that play dead, grow spines, and shed leaves in order to survive in the harsh desert climate. And even trees that grow into living sculptures. This garden is proof that while life in the desert may be challenging, it is also beautiful. When we come back, a living fossil spreads its lofty branches in Massachusetts. A tree that was once thought to be extinct grows hale and hardy. Next on Great American Gardens. Welcome back to Great American Gardens. Next, we head to a garden that has 600 trees that are over 100 years old. The ancient trees of the Arnold Arboretum in Boston, Massachusetts, give visitors a timeless feel, a sense of history on a grand scale. From the Boston Tea Party to Paul Revere's famous ride, Boston is a town rich in history. So it's only fitting that Boston boasts the oldest public arboretum in the country. But here, history unfolds quietly, and the only drama is found in the changing of the seasons and the slow and steady growth of century-old trees.
They walk through and they see trees that are well over 100 years old, and they feel a real sense of history.
Those who pass beneath this canopy of amazing trees take a horticultural hike around the world with living fossils from China, a Japanese tree with unforgettable flowers, and a nearly century-old cork tree from Manchuria that was hit by lightning in 2001 and survived. This is a garden where trees, not flowers, play a starring role.
The Arboretum is full of trees, but it's quite a diversity of trees. And I think people start to realize that as they walk through.
Within the Arboretum's 265 acres grow 4,500 varieties of woody plants.
The Arboretum is laid out in a very definite planting scheme. It's called the Bentham and Hooker scheme, something that was in existence at its inception in the late 1800s. The plants are located with their plant families, so it makes it very easy for people coming in to see plants that are similar.
Established in 1872, the Arboretum was designed to look like a park by America's premier landscape architect of the time, Frederick Law Olmsted. Based on the assumption that visitors would view the Arboretum by horse and carriage, he proposed a series of gentle, winding roads that would complement the natural curves of the land. Making the most of this naturalistic approach, the Arboretum created a woodland garden with international flair.
The mission of the Arboretum from its inception has been to collect all the woody plants that can grow in this Boston environment. So all of the successive directors have been true to that mission and sent out collecting expeditions to Asia or other parts of the world to collect plants to see how they grow on this site.
Perhaps the most amazing find of all came in 1941. That's when the Dawn redwood tree was discovered in China. Up until then, no one knew the tree was still growing.
It was discovered only as a fossil in the early 1940s and thought to be extinct. But then a small stand was discovered in China, and the Arboretum sent a plant expedition over to collect seed, and we ended up distributing seed throughout the world and basically being very instrumental in saving this wonderful tree from extinction.
This tree was planted in 1948 from the seeds gathered in China. Today, more than 50 years later, it towers over 80 feet in the air and is now one of the most famous landmarks in the garden. While the Dawn redwood is the Arboretum's signature tree, others steal the limelight with their showy display of color. The mimosa tree dazzles with its cotton candy pink flowers, while the golden rain tree captures the imagination with clouds of yellow flowers. This species was once used to guard the tombs of Chinese royalty. But perhaps the most memorable tree is the Japanese Stewardia, a tree of contrasts. Its mottled bark looks like camouflage, while its flowers demand attention.
The flower of the Japanese Stewardia sometimes is compared to a fried egg because it's got a big white petal surrounding a yellow center, so it's really very showy. It blooms in July, which is a time when you don't have many trees blooming.
While this tree grows wild in Japan and Korea, it can be incredibly difficult to grow here. Seeds don't germinate, cuttings die, and it doesn't like to be transplanted. But researchers at the Arboretum unlock the tree's secrets, discovering that the seeds need to be warm for precisely 4 months and then cold for 3 months before they can be successfully planted. But while the Arboretum goes to great lengths to learn Mother Nature's mysteries, it also knows when to leave well enough alone. This amur cork tree was recently hit by lightning. Gardeners will not cover the gash with tar, which could trap moisture and invite disease, but will instead allow the tree to mend itself. The cork tree will cover the wound with new tissue called callus, a process which can take several years. The amur cork tree will heal at its own pace. For within the Arnold Arboretum, time moves slowly, little affected by the history of man. This is a place where people can momentarily put life on hold and enjoy the rhythm of nature. When Great American Gardens continues, a one-time eyesore is now a sight for sore eyes in New York City. We'll see how Endor Community Gardens was born when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tricia Springer. The next garden we're visiting is a true public garden. A neglected corner of the Bronx became a garden through the drive and determination of a neighborhood tired of all the litter and graffiti. The result? New York's Endor Community Garden. Along its path from Manhattan to the Bronx, New York's Henry Hudson Parkway was once lined with parks, meant to keep city dwellers connected to nature. But in recent decades, this park in the Bronx became a trash-filled, noisy hangout. Then, Hillary Kitase moved into the neighborhood and inspired her community to turn the neglected place into a garden named Endor.
It started out as just a cleanup project, hauling out cars, TV sets, cleaning it up. And then all of a sudden, I guess it was one day in the course of doing this, you look up through the trees and the light is dappled and it's just one of those perfect moments and you see what it could be.
Now volunteers are recreating a diverse urban forest. Gardeners are solving thorny social problems with plants. And local teenagers are pitching in to improve their community. These 3 acres are once again becoming a respite from urban life, where people can walk their dogs or simply sit on a tree stump and relax.
In New York City, it is precious. We don't have it, so these little fragments of urban forest can become religious experiences for us.
The Endor Community Garden signals a return to what New York's parkways were meant to be. The Henry Hudson Parkway was built in 1934 with pockets of parkland to make the modern necessity more natural.
And it was also supposed to be for the residents of the city to be shielded from the cars. But the park has disappeared from most of the parkways. It's a budget problem. These bloom in the winter.
Well, hellebores bloom in March, and they last a long time.
That would be lovely.
Yeah.
Hilary Kitase's mission to put the park back into Parkway began in 1999. Her first targets were some unsightly concrete barriers, which had become magnets for graffiti. She began calling local officials, and soon the highway barriers were replaced with more natural boulders. Then she organized volunteers to clean up the garbage and begin planting. Hilary's then 12-year-old daughter came up with the name, Endor.
My daughter is a Star Wars freak. It's the only forested moon in Star Wars, Return of the Jedi.
The trees that reminded her daughter of that forest moon in Star Wars are mostly Norway maples. The trees, while lovely, are not natives, and they'd almost taken over the park. Today, gardeners are thinning out the Norway maples to make way for other trees and plants.
And this is probably originally an oak and hickory forest. And now we have hickories, and we have a few saplings that we've surrounded with wire to protect them from the dogs. We're basically trying to rebirth the original forest in a small way.
Gardeners are also creating a new understory of flowers and shrubs.
I've been trying to find what kind of plants will survive in this kind of inhospitable situation, which is basically dry woods. Serious shade and tree roots and very dry soil, which in some places is very, very thin.
Sunflowers and daylilies do well along the sunny edges of Endor, while shade-loving plants like hostas do better amid the trees. Plants are also chosen for qualities that encourage people to treat the garden with respect. Gardeners wanted people to stop hanging out on this wall and tossing garbage, so they planted prickly barberry bushes next to the wall to drive home the point. Adding new plants to this forest is a challenge because there's no formal irrigation system. Volunteers quench the garden's thirst by hooking up a hose to the local fire hydrant. People from all over the community have taken up Hilary's quest to take back this park. These high school students came up with the idea to build a set of steps to create a safer path up this steep slope.
What happens is that people travel in the road where cars are coming. That's how they get to this end over here. So what we did was we created the steps to connect with this trail so people can go straight up the steps onto over there without having to go onto the road.
The young people are part of an urban forest project, which is teaching them about improving the environment, helping the community, and building a sense of pride.
We can actually come here and show people what we did all summer. So
Exactly.
you should be proud of that.
We did it. High five. Yeah.
Like the rebels in the Star Wars classic, here at Endor, a small band of Bronx neighbors is slowly succeeding in its quest to regain what once seemed lost. When we return to Great American Gardens, we've found the oldest paper bark maple tree in America. We'll tell you where it grows and how it got its name. It's just ahead. Welcome back to Great American Gardens. Earlier in the show, we took a stroll through the nation's oldest public arboretum, a place full of ancient and unique trees. We often think of arboretums as places that preserve rare plant species, but the Arnold Arboretum has a history of introducing species to the public as well. One such introduction is the paperbark maple. This paperbark maple was planted in the Arboretum in 1907, the first of its kind in America. It was brought to the Arboretum from its homeland in China.
It has a very sinuous feeling to the bark. It feels like muscles on a person's arm. And the bark actually flakes off in papery thin strips, so that's why it's called the paper bark maple.
No one knows for sure why a tree would shed its bark like a snake shedding its skin, but one possibility has to do with discouraging vines from growing on the trunk, which can prevent a tree from getting the sunlight that it needs. The peeling bark and blue-green leaves make the paperbark maple a popular ornamental tree. While the tree itself is slow-growing, its bark begins peeling during the second year of life, so gardeners can enjoy this unusual quality soon after the tree is planted. Thank you for joining us on our tour of Great American Gardens, and remember, public gardens are your gardens.